The Tibetan Book of the Dead, Chapter 11, The Great Liberation by Hearing. Part 1. An elucidation of the intermediate state of the time of death and of the appearance of the peaceful deities in the intermediate state of reality. Herein is contained the Great Liberation by Hearing, an elucidation of the intermediate state of reality, which is an extract from the Peaceful and Wrathful Deities, a profound sacred teaching entitled Natural Liberation Through Recognition of Enlightened Intention. I bow down to the spiritual teachers, embodiment of the three Buddha bodies, to the Buddha body of reality, infinite light, Amitabha, to the Buddha body of perfect resource, the peaceful and wrathful lotus deities, and to the Buddha body of emanation, Padmakara, protector of beings. This great liberation by hearing, the skillful means which liberates yogins of average ability during the intermediate states, has three parts, namely, the introduction, the main subject matter of the text, and the conclusion. Introduction. All aspirants should experientially cultivate the steps of guidance, which are the means by which corporeal beings can achieve liberation. Those of highest acumen should certainly attain liberation in their lifetime through the application of that guidance. But if liberation does not occur thereby, yogins should implement, during the intermediate state of the time of death, the appropriate procedure outlined in the consciousness transference, natural liberation through recollection. Yogins of average ability should certainly be liberated by that. If liberation is not effected by the application of consciousness transference, then the recitation of the following Great Liberation by Hearing should be persistently made during the intermediate state of reality. First, therefore, yogins should examine the signs of death in accordance with the text entitled Natural Liberation Through Recognition of the Visual Indications and Signs of Death, also known as the mirror which clarifies the visible indications of death. Thereupon, when the inner signs of the processes of death are definitively and completely present, the appropriate procedure, as outlined in the consciousness transference, natural liberation through recollection, should be applied. Thus, if this transference is effective, there will be no need to read aloud the Great Liberation by Hearing. If, however, the transference is ineffective, this liberation by hearing should be read aloud with correct pronunciation and clear diction, close to the corpse. If the corpse is not present, one should sit next to the bed or seat of the deceased. Then, having invoked the power of truth and summoned the consciousness of the deceased, one should imagine him or her to be listening in one's presence, and read aloud this great liberation by hearing. At this time, the relatives and close friends should be advised to show restraint, because at this stage it is not appropriate to cry or dramatically express one's grief. If the deceased body is present, then during the interval which follows the ceasing of respiration, this great liberation by hearing should be read aloud by a spiritual teacher, or by a spiritual sibling, sincere practitioner, or a sympathetic friend, placing the lips close to the ear of the deceased, without actually touching. The main subject matter. Now follows the actual exegesis of the liberation by hearing. First, one should make extensive offerings to the three precious jewels. If these are unobtainable, one should make offerings by arraying whatever one has as a support for visualization and mentally emanating an immeasurable quantity of offerings. Then one should recite 3 or 7 times the aspirational prayer calling to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas for assistance. After this, one should melodiously recite the aspirational prayer which protects from fear of the intermediate states, the aspirational prayer which rescues from the dangerous pathways of the intermediate states, and the root verses of the 6 intermediate states. Thereafter, this great liberation by hearing is to be read aloud 7 or 3 times, or as many times as the circumstances permit. The main subject matter of the great liberation by hearing comprises 3 sections: the introduction to inner radiance during the intermediate state of the time of death, the great elucidation which introduces the intermediate state of reality, and a teaching on the means for obstructing the entrance to the womb during the intermediate state of rebirth. Introduction to inner radiance in the intermediate state of the time of death. This introduction is made on behalf of those individuals who have good understanding but do not yet have recognition of inner radiance, as well as those who have gained recognition but have little familiarity, and all ordinary persons who have received little experiential guidance. By means of this introduction, such beings will, upon recognizing the inner radiance of the ground, attain the uncreated Buddha body of reality in an ascending and core-penetrating manner, without experiencing the intermediate states. Introduction to the inner radiance of the ground. As for the method of making this introduction, it is best if the root spiritual teacher from whom the dying person personally received guidance can be present. If he cannot be present, then a spiritual sibling with identical commitments should be called upon, or if none of these can be present, then a spiritual friend holding the same lineage should attend, or if none of these at all can be present, someone who knows how to read aloud with correct pronunciation and clear diction should recite the introductions many times. Thereby the dying person will remember that which had formerly been introduced by his or her spiritual teacher, and immediately afterwards, being set face to face with the inner radiance of the ground, will undoubtedly attain liberation. Concerning the time for making this introduction. After respiration has ceased, the vital energy is absorbed into the channel of pristine cognition, and the consciousness of the deceased naturally arises as a non-conceptual inner radiance. Later, the vital energy will be reversed and escape into the right and left channels, and as a result, the appearances of the subsequent intermediate state of reality will arise suddenly. Therefore, the introduction to inner radiance at the time of death should be made before the vital energy has escaped into the right and left channels. Generally, the length of time during which the inner breath remains present within the central channel is just about the time taken to eat a meal. As regards the actual mode of making this introduction, it is best if the consciousness transference is effected at that moment when the respiration is about to cease. If it is not, one should say the following words: O child of Buddha nature, call the name of the dying person, the time has now come for you to seek a path. As soon as your respiration ceases, the luminosity known as the inner radiance of the first intermediate state, which your spiritual teacher formerly introduced to you, will arise. Immediately your respiration ceases, all phenomena will become empty and utterly naked like space. At the same time, a naked awareness will arise, not extraneous to yourself, but radiant, empty, and without horizon or center. At that moment, you should personally recognize this intrinsic nature and rest in the state of that experience. I, too, will introduce it to you at that time. These words should be spoken audibly many times, impressing them on the mind of the dying person until respiration ceases. Then, when the respiration is on the point of ceasing, one should lay the dying person on the right side, in the posture of the lion, and take the pulse. Once the throbbing of the two carotid arteries has stopped, they should be firmly pressed at their pressure points on the neck. Then the vital energy, having entered the central channel, cannot reverse and escape, and it will certainly emerge through the crown fontanelle. The introduction should continue to be made at this time. This phase in the process of death is called the inner radiance of reality during the first intermediate state. It is the unique and incontrovertible enlightened intention of the Buddha body of reality, which arises in the minds of all living beings. At the moment of death, this coincides with the period when the vital energy is absorbed into the central channel, after respiration has ceased, and before the ceasing of the inner breath. Ordinary people describe this state as loss of consciousness. The duration of this experience of inner radiance is uncertain, for it depends on the health and characteristics of the dying person's physical constitution and on the degree of his or her proficiency in the practices related to the vital energies and channels. For those who have considerable practical experience, or those who have achieved stability in the practice of calm abiding, or those who have healthy energy channels, this experience can be prolonged. In striving to make this introduction, therefore, one should remind the deceased repeatedly by giving the instruction as above and below until serous fluid emerges from the apertures of the sense organs. For those persons of great negativity and those classes of beings with unhealthy channels, this phase lasts no longer than a single snapping of the fingers. In others, it may last for as long as it takes to eat a meal. However, as most sutras and tantras state that the period of unconsciousness following the moment of death may last for 3.5 days, generally one should persevere for that length of time in making this introduction to inner radiance. As for the way in which this introduction is made, if capable, the dying person should facilitate this of his or her own accord by projecting a formally cultivated spiritual practice into the intermediate state. If the individual is not capable of this, then a spiritual teacher, a student, or a spiritual sibling who was a close friend should stay nearby and clearly remind the dying person of the signs of death in their correct sequence, saying, "Now, the sign of the dissolution of earth into water is present, of water into fire, fire into wind, wind into consciousness, and so forth, as set down in the text entitled Natural Liberation through Recognition of the Visual Indications and Signs of Death." Then, when the sequence of the signs is almost complete, the attendant should encourage the dying person to cultivate the following altruistic intention, beginning with the words, "O child of Buddha nature." Or if the dying person is a spiritual teacher, the attendant should gently say the following words into the ear. "O Venerable One, I beg you not to be distracted from the cultivation of an altruistic intention." If the dying person is a spiritual sibling or anyone else, the attendant should call to him or her by name and say the following words. "O child of Buddha nature, that which is called death has now arrived. Therefore, you should adopt an altruistic motivation and concentrate your thinking as follows. I have arrived at the time of death, so now, relying on the process of death, I will single-mindedly cultivate an altruistic intention. I will meditate on the generation of loving kindness, compassion, and an altruistic intention to attain enlightenment. For the benefit of all sentient beings who are as limitless as space, I must attain perfect Buddhahood. And in particular, you should think, at this moment, for the sake of all sentient beings, I must recognize the time of death as the arising of inner radiance, the Buddha body of reality, and while in that state, I must attain the supreme accomplishment of the Great Seal and thereby act for the good of all sentient beings. If I do not achieve this accomplishment, then, recognizing the intermediate state as it is, I will actualize the coalescent Buddha body of the Great Seal during the intermediate state, and thereby manifesting in order to instruct each in accordance with his or her needs, I will act for the benefit of all sentient beings who are as limitless as space. Without giving up the focus on cultivating an altruistic intention, in the above way, recollect the meditative experiences which you formerly developed on the basis of the oral teachings. These words should be clearly spoken, while placing the lips close to the ear of the dying person, without permitting the attention of the dying one to be distracted even for an instant. The attendant should remind him or her of past meditative experiences. Then, when the respiration has ceased and the two carotid arteries have been firmly pressed, remind the dying person with the following words, if the individual was a spiritual teacher or a spiritual friend greater than oneself. Venerable One, the inner radiance of the ground is now arisen before you. Recognize it and concentrate directly on its experiential cultivation. For all others, one should introduce the inner radiance of the ground with the following words. O child of Buddha nature, call the name of the individual. Listen. Pure inner radiance, reality itself, is now arising before you. Recognize it. O child of Buddha nature, this radiant essence that is now your conscious awareness is a brilliant emptiness. It is beyond substance, beyond characteristics, and beyond color, completely empty of inherent existence in any respect whatsoever. This is the female Buddha Samantabhadri, the essential nature of reality. The essence of your own conscious awareness is emptiness. Yet, this is not a vacuous or nihilistic emptiness. This, your very own conscious awareness, is unimpededly radiant, brilliant, and vibrant. This conscious awareness is the male Buddha Samantabhadra. The utterly indivisible presence of these two, the essence of your own awareness, which is empty, without inherent existence with respect to any substance whatsoever, and your own conscious awareness, which is vibrant and radiantly present, is the Buddha body of reality. This intrinsic awareness, manifest in a great mass of light, in which radiance and emptiness are indivisible, is the Buddha nature of unchanging light, beyond birth or death. Just to recognize this is enough. If you recognize this brilliant essence of your own conscious awareness to be the Buddha nature, then to gaze into intrinsic awareness is to abide in the enlightened intention of all the Buddhas. This introduction should be made 3 or 7 times, with correct pronunciation and clear diction. Accordingly, the deceased will firstly recollect the teachings as they had been formerly given by his or her teacher, and secondly be introduced to inner radiance as a naked natural awareness. And then thirdly, having recognized this, he or she will attain the Buddha body of reality, beyond conjunction or disjunction, and certainly achieve liberation. Recognition of the first inner radiance of the ground takes place in this way. Introduction to the inner radiance of the path. If, however, it is feared that the deceased has not recognized the first inner radiance, the so-called second inner radiance of the path will arise. Again, it is said that this second inner radiance lasts a little more than the time it takes to eat a meal after the respiration has ceased. Specifically, it arises once the vital energy has escaped into the right or left channel, whichever is appropriate depending on the positive and negative past actions of the deceased, and once the vital energy has emerged through one of the orifices of the body. When this occurs, the consciousness suddenly becomes awake and lucid. Although it is said that this second inner radiance also lasts approximately for as long as it takes to eat a meal, this actually depends, as before, on whether or not the energy channels are healthy and whether or not the individual has or lacks meditative experience. Now, at this point, the consciousness emerges from the body, and initially the individual may not know whether or not he or she has died. The relatives are seen as before, and their cries of sorrow can be heard. During this period, before the harsh and bewildering experiences related to past actions have arisen, and before the terrifying experiences related to Yama have occurred, the oral teaching should be given. This oral teaching concerns both the perfection stage and the generation stage of meditation. If the deceased was engaged in the practices of the perfection stage, one should call to him or her 3 times, by name, and repeat the above instruction, which is the introduction to inner radiance. If the deceased was engaged in the practices of the generation stage, one should read aloud the formal description of the individual's chosen meditational deity as set down in the corresponding meditative cycle. Then remind him or her with the following words. O child of Buddha nature, meditate on this your meditational deity. Do not be distracted. Concentrate intently on your meditational deity. Meditate that the deity appears and yet is without inherent existence, like the reflection of the moon in the water. Do not meditate on the deity as a solid corporeal form. If the deceased was an ordinary person without a specific practice, then preface the introduction with the following words. Meditate on the Lord of great compassion. By means of such an introduction, there is no doubt that even those who have not recognized the nature of the intermediate state will do so. This, the above precise reminder, should be given by a spiritual teacher or sibling to those who, despite having already received this introduction from a spiritual teacher while they were alive, have an undeveloped meditative experience and accordingly will not recognize the intermediate state by themselves. Equally, this instruction is of crucial importance in the case of those who, despite their meditative experience, are bewildered by serious illness at the moment of death, and therefore cannot recall their past meditative experiences. And finally, it is particularly necessary in the case of those beings who, despite their former meditative experience, are at risk of falling into lower existences as a result of having broken their vows and having failed to maintain their basic commitments. As stated above, it is best if recognition occurs during the first intermediate state. However, if it does not occur therein, awareness can be awakened and liberation attained during the second intermediate state. This second intermediate state is also called the pure illusory body. During this second phase, consciousness achieves an instance of clarity, even though the deceased may not know whether or not they are dead. If the teaching is given at this time, therefore, the mother and child aspects of reality can meet, and the deceased will no longer be controlled by the force of past actions. Just as, for example, darkness is destroyed by the light of the sun, the controlling force of past actions is destroyed by this inner radiance of the path, and liberation is attained. Now, this so-called second intermediate state, occurring at that point when consciousness leaves the body, is one which suddenly appears to the mental body assumed by the deceased, while the consciousness of the deceased retains the same range of hearing as before. If the above oral teaching is given at this time, its purpose can therefore be accomplished. Since the bewildering appearances generated by past actions have not yet arisen, the deceased is able to direct his or her attention anywhere. Therefore, even though the individual may not have attained recognition of the inner radiance of the ground, he or she will be liberated by the recognition of the inner radiance of the path, which is the second intermediate state. Introduction to the intermediate state of reality. If liberation is still not attained through the above introductions, then the intermediate state of reality, also called the third intermediate state, will arise. It is during this third phase that the bewildering apparitions which are the products of past actions emerge. Therefore, it is extremely important to read aloud the following great introduction to the intermediate state of reality at this juncture. It is most powerful and beneficial. At around this time, the bereaved relatives will be crying and expressing their grief. They will no longer be serving the deceased's share of food. They will have removed his or her clothes and stripped down the bed and so forth. Although the deceased can see them, they cannot see the deceased. Although the deceased can hear them calling out, they cannot hear the departed one calling back. So the deceased may turn away in a state of despair. At this time, three phenomena, sounds, lights, and rays of light, will arise, and the deceased may faint with fear, terror, or awe. Thus, during this period, the following great introduction to the intermediate state of reality should be given. Call the deceased by name, and say the following words with correct pronunciation and clear diction. O child of Buddha nature, listen very intently and without distraction. There are 6 kinds of intermediate state, namely, the intermediate state of living or natural existence, the intermediate state of dreams, the intermediate state of meditative stability or concentration, the intermediate state of the time of death, the intermediate state of reality, and the intermediate state of consequent rebirth. O child of Buddha nature, during and after death, you will experience 3 intermediate states: the intermediate state of the time of death, the intermediate state of reality, and the intermediate state of rebirth. Of these 3, it was the intermediate state of the time of death which you experienced until yesterday. Although the inner radiance of reality arose during that time, you did not recognize it. So now, as a result, you have been compelled to wander here, and now you will experience the intermediate state of reality, followed by the intermediate state of rebirth. You must therefore recognize, without distraction, the instruction and events which I am now going to introduce to you. O child of Buddha nature, that which is called death has now arrived. You are leaving this world. But in this, you are not alone. This happens to everyone. Do not be attached to this life. Do not cling to this life. Even if you remain attached and clinging, you do not have the power to stay. You will only continue to roam within the cycles of existence. Therefore, do not be attached and do not cling. Think of the 3 precious jewels. O child of Buddha nature, however terrifying the appearances of the intermediate state of reality might be, do not forget the following words. Go forward remembering their meaning. The crucial point is that through them recognition may be attained. Alas, now as the intermediate state of reality arises before me, renouncing the merest thought of awe, terror, or fear, I will recognize all that arises to be awareness, manifesting naturally of itself. Knowing such sounds, lights, and rays to be visionary phenomena of the intermediate state, at this moment, having reached this critical point, I must not fear the assembly of peaceful and wrathful deities, which manifest naturally. Go forward, reciting these words distinctly, and be mindful of their meaning. Do not forget them, for it is essential to recognize with certainty that whatever terrifying experiences may arise, they are natural manifestations of actual reality. O child of Buddha nature, when your mind and body separate, the pure, luminous apparitions of reality itself will arise, subtle and clear, radiant and dazzling, naturally bright and awesome, shimmering like a mirage on a plain in summer. Do not fear them. Do not be terrified. Do not be awed. They are the natural luminosities of your own actual reality. Therefore, recognize them as they are. From within these lights, the natural sound of reality will resound, clear and thunderous, reverberating like 1,000 simultaneous peals of thunder. This is the natural sound of your own actual reality. So do not be afraid, do not be terrified, do not be awed. The body that you now have is called a mental body. It is the product of subtle propensities, and not a solid corporeal body of flesh and blood. Therefore, whatever sounds, lights, or rays may arise, they cannot harm you. For you are beyond death now. It is enough that you simply recognize the sounds and luminosities to be manifestations of your own actual reality. Know that this is the intermediate state. O child of Buddha nature, if you do not now recognize these phenomena to be natural manifestations, whatever meditative practices you may have undertaken whilst in the human world, if you have not previously encountered this present instruction, you will fear the light, you will be awed by the sound, and you will be terrified by the rays. If you do not now understand this essential point of the teaching, you will not recognize the sounds, the lights, and the rays, and you will continue to roam within the cycles of existence. O child of Buddha nature, should you have moved on without recognition after having been unconscious for up to 3.5 days, you will awaken from unconsciousness and wonder, what has happened to me? So recognize this to be the intermediate state. At this time, the aspects of the cycles of existence are reversed into their own true nature, and all phenomena are arising as lights and Buddha bodies. On the first day of the intermediate state of reality, all space will arise as a blue light. At this time, from the central Buddha field called pervasive seminal point, the transcendent Lord Vairochana will dawn before you, his body white in color, seated on a lion throne, holding in his right hand an 8-spoked wheel, and embraced by his consort Akasa Dat Vishvari. A blue luminosity, radiant and clear, bright and dazzling, indicative of the pristine cognition of reality's expanse, which is the natural purity of your aggregate of consciousness, will emanate from the heart of Vairochana and his consort, and it will shine piercingly before you at the level of your heart with such brilliance that your eyes cannot bear it. Together with this luminosity, a dull white light, indicative of the realm of the gods, will also dawn directly before you and touch your heart. At this time, under the sway of negative past actions, you will wish to flee in fear and terror from the bright blue light, which is the pristine cognition of reality's expanse, and you will come to perceive the dull white light of the God realms with delight. At this moment, do not be awed by the blue luminosity, which is radiant and dazzling, clear and very bright. This is the supreme inner radiance of pristine cognition. Do not be terrified. This is the light ray of the Tathagata, which is called the pristine cognition of reality's expanse. Have confidence in it. Be drawn to it with longing devotion. Pray with devotion, thinking, this is the light ray of the transcendent Lord Vairochana's compassion. I take refuge in it. For this, in reality, is the transcendent Lord Vairochana and his consort come to escort you on the dangerous pathway of the intermediate state. This is the light ray of Vairochana's compassion. Therefore do not delight in the dull white light of the God realms. Do not be attached to it. Do not cling to it. This dull white light is the inviting path created by your own habitual tendencies for deep delusion, which you yourself have generated. If you become attached to it, you will roam within the God realms and be drawn into the cycles of existence of the 6 classes of beings. This dull light is an obstruction, blocking the path to liberation. Do not look at it. Be devoted to the bright blue light. Focus intently on the transcendent Lord Vairochana, and repeat after me the following aspirational prayer. Oh, as I roam in cyclic existence, driven by deep-seated delusion, may the transcendent Lord Vairochana draw me forward, leading me on the path of radiant light, which is the pristine cognition of reality's expanse. May the Supreme Consort, Akasha Dat Vishvari, support me from behind, and thus encircled, may I be rescued from the fearsome passageway of the intermediate state, and be escorted to the level of an utterly perfect Buddha. By making this aspirational prayer with fervent devotion, you will dissolve into rainbow light in the heart of Vairochana and his consort, and you will attain Buddhahood as the Buddha body of perfect resource in the central Buddha field of the dense array, Gana Vyuha. If, however, even after receiving this introduction, as the result of negative obscuration and aversion, the deceased are nonetheless overawed by the lights and rays and turn away, and even if, after repeating the aspirational prayer, they remain bewildered, then on the 2nd day, Vajrasattva's assembly of deities will come to escort them, and at the same time, the negative past actions which are conducive to a rebirth in the hell realms will also emerge. Again, calling the deceased by name, the introduction should be given with the following words. O child of Buddha nature, listen without distraction. On the 2nd day, the purity of the entire element water will arise in the form of a white light. At that time, from the eastern Buddha field of manifest joy, Abhirati, the transcendent Lord Akshobhya Vajrasattva, will dawn before you, his body blue in color, holding in his right hand a 5-pronged Vajra, seated on an elephant throne and embraced by his consort, Buddhalochana. They are encircled by 2 male bodhisattvas, Kshitigarbha and Maitreya, and 2 female bodhisattvas, Lasya and Pushpa. Thus 6 Buddha bodies will be shining before you from within a space of rainbow light. A brilliant white light, indicative of the mirror-like pristine cognition, which is the natural purity of the aggregate of form, white and dazzling, radiant and clear, will emanate from the heart of Vajrasattva and his consort, and it will shine piercingly before you at the level of your heart with such brilliance that your eyes cannot bear it. Together with this light of pristine cognition, a dull, smoky light, indicative of the hell realms, will also dawn before you and touch your heart. At that time, under the sway of aversion, you will wish to turn away in fear and terror from the bright white light and come to perceive the dull, smoky light of the hell realms with delight. At that moment, you should fearlessly recognize the white light, white and dazzling, radiant and clear, to be pristine cognition. Have confidence in it. Be drawn to it with longing devotion. Pray with devotion, thinking, "This is the light ray of the transcendent Lord Vajrasattva's compassion. I take refuge in it." This, in reality, is Vajrasattva and his consort, come to escort you on the dangerous pathway of the intermediate state. This is the light ray hook of Vajrasattva's compassion. Be devoted to it. Do not delight in the dull, smoky light of the hell realms. This dull light is the inviting path of the negative obscurations created by your own deep aversion, which you yourself have generated. If you become attached to it, you will fall into the realms of hell, sinking into a swamp of unbearable suffering, from which there will be no immediate opportunity for escape. This dull light is an obstacle blocking the path to liberation. Do not look at it. Abandon your aversion. Do not be attached to it. Do not cling to it. Be devoted to the white light, radiant and dazzling. Focus intently on the transcendent Lord Vajrasattva and recite the following aspirational prayer. Oh, as I roam in cyclic existence driven by deep-seated aversion, may the transcendent Lord Vajrasattva draw me forward, leading me on the path of radiant light, which is the mirror-like pristine cognition. May the Supreme Consort, Buddha Lochana, support me from behind, and thus encircled may I be rescued from the fearsome passageway of the intermediate state and be escorted to the level of an utterly perfect Buddha. By making this aspirational prayer with fervent devotion, you will dissolve into rainbow light in the heart of the transcendent Lord Vajrasattva, and you will attain Buddhahood as the Buddha body of perfect resource in the Eastern Buddha field of manifest joy, Abhirati. Yet even after being introduced in this way, there are some individuals who will turn away in fear from the light ray hook of compassion, being gripped by pride and powerful negative obscuration. So it is that on the third day, the transcendent Lord Ratnasambhava's assembly of deities will come to escort the deceased, and simultaneously, the light path indicative of the human realm will emerge. Again, calling the deceased by name, the introduction should be given with the following words. O child of Buddha nature, listen without distraction. On the third day, the purity of the entire element earth will arise in the form of a yellow light. At this time, from the yellow southern Buddha field of the glorious Srimat, the transcendent Lord Ratnasambhava will dawn before you, his body yellow in color, holding in his right hand a jewel, seated on a horse throne, and embraced by his supreme consort, Mamaki. They are encircled by two male bodhisattvas, Akashagarbha and Samantabhadra, and two female bodhisattvas, Malya and Dupa. Thus 6 Buddha bodies will be shining before you from within a space of rainbow light. A yellow light, indicative of the pristine cognition of sameness, which is the natural purity of the aggregate of feeling, yellow and dazzling, adorned by greater and lesser seminal points of light, radiant, clear, and unbearable to the eyes, will emanate from the heart of Ratnasambhava and his consort, and will shine piercingly before you at the level of your heart, with such brilliance that your eyes cannot bear it. Together with the light of pristine cognition, a dull blue light, indicative of the human realm, will also dawn before you and touch your heart. At that time, Under the sway of pride, you will wish to turn away in fear and terror from the bright yellow light, and you will come to delight in the dull blue light of the human realm and feel attachment towards it. At that moment, abandon your fear of the yellow light and recognize it as pristine cognition, yellow and dazzling, radiant and clear. Let your awareness relax and abide directly within it, in a state of non-activity. Again and again, have confidence in it. Be drawn to it with longing devotion. If you recognize it as the natural luminosity of your own awareness, even though you may feel no devotion towards it and have not recited the aspirational prayer, all the Buddha bodies and light rays will dissolve inseparably into you, and you will attain Buddhahood. If you are unable to recognize this radiance as being the natural luminosity of your own awareness, then pray with devotion, thinking, "This is the light ray of the Transcendent Lord Ratnasambhava's compassion. I take refuge in it." This, in reality, is the Transcendent Lord Ratnasambhava come to escort you on the fearsome, dangerous pathway of the intermediate state. This is the light ray hook of Ratnasambhava's compassion. Be devoted to it. Do not delight in the dull blue light of the human realm. This dull light is the inviting path created by your own habitual tendencies for deep-seated pride, which you yourself have generated. If you become attached to it, you will tumble down into the human realm. You will experience the sufferings of birth, old age, sickness, and death, and there will be no intermediate opportunity to escape from the swamp of cyclic existence. This dull light is an obstacle, blocking the path to liberation. Do not look at it. Abandon pride. Abandon your habitual tendencies. Do not be attached to the dull blue light. Do not cling to it. Be devoted to the yellow light, golden and dazzling. Focus intently and single-mindedly on the Transcendent Lord Ratnasambhava and recite the following aspirational prayer. Oh, as I roam in cyclic existence, driven by deep-seated pride, may the Transcendent Lord Ratnasambhava draw me forward, leading me on the path of radiant light, which is the pristine cognition of sameness. May the Supreme Consort Mamaki support me from behind, and thus encircled may I be rescued from the fearsome passageway of the intermediate state, and be escorted to the level of an utterly perfect Buddha. By making this aspirational prayer with fervent devotion, you will dissolve into rainbow light in the heart of the Transcendent Lord Ratnasambhava, and you will attain Buddhahood as the Buddha body of perfect resource in the southern Buddha field of the glorious Srimat. There is no doubt that if the deceased are receptive to this introduction, they will attain liberation, however weak their individual ability may be. Yet even after being given this introduction many times, there are some whose positive opportunities have been exhausted by, for example, their great negativity, or through not having maintained their commitments, and so forth, who, even now, will not have accepted this introduction. These individuals will have turned away in fear of both the sounds and the luminosities, and become agitated by desire and negative obscuration. So it is that on the fourth day, the Transcendent Lord Amitabha's assembly of deities will come to escort them, and at this same time, the light path indicative of the realm of the anguished spirits, which is generated by desire and miserliness, will emerge. Again, calling the deceased by name, the introduction should be given with the following words. O child of Buddha nature, listen without distraction. On the fourth day, the purity of the element fire will arise in the form of a red light. At that time, from the red western Buddha field of the blissful Sukhavati, the transcendent Lord Amitabha will dawn before you, his body red in color, holding in his right hand a lotus flower, seated on a peacock throne and embraced by the supreme consort, Pandaravasini. They are encircled by two male bodhisattvas, Avalokiteshvara and Manjushri, and two female bodhisattvas, Gita and Aloka. Thus 6 Buddha bodies will be shining before you from within a space of rainbow light. A red light indicative of the pristine cognition of discernment, which is the natural purity of the aggregate of perceptions, red and dazzling, adorned by greater and lesser seminal points, radiant and clear, bright and dazzling, will emanate from the heart of Amitabha and his consort, and will shine piercingly before you at the level of your heart with such brilliance that your eyes cannot bear it. Do not be afraid. Together with the light of pristine cognition, a dull yellow light, indicative of the realm of anguished spirits, will also dawn before you and touch your heart. Do not delight in the dull yellow light. Do not become attached to it, and do not cling to it. At this time, under the sway of deep desire, you will wish to turn away in terror from the bright red light, and you will come to delight in the dull yellow light of the anguished spirits and feel attachment towards it. At this moment, abandon your fear and recognize the red light, bright and dazzling, radiant and clear, to be pristine cognition. Let your awareness relax and abide directly within it, resting in a state of non-activity. Have confidence in the radiant red luminosity. Be drawn to it with longing devotion. If you recognize this radiance as the natural luminosity of your own awareness, even though you may feel no devotion towards it and have not recited the aspirational prayer, all the Buddha bodies and light rays will dissolve inseparably into you, and you will attain Buddhahood. If you are not able to recognize the radiance in this way, then pray with devotion, thinking, "This is the light ray of the transcendent Lord Amitabha's compassion. I take refuge in it." This truly is the light ray hook of the transcendent Lord Amitabha's compassion. Be devoted to it. Do not turn away. Should you turn away, the luminosity will accompany you inseparably. Do not be afraid. Do not be attached to the dull yellow light of the anguished spirits. This is the inviting path created by your own habitual tendencies for deep-seated desire, which you yourself have generated. If you become attached to this dull light, you will fall down into the realm of the anguished spirits, and you will experience unbearable sufferings of hunger and thirst. This dull light is an obstacle, blocking the path to liberation. Do not be attached to it. Abandon your attachment. Do not cling to it. Be devoted to the red light, which is radiant and dazzling, and focus intently and single-mindedly on the transcendent Lord Amitabha and his consort, and recite the following aspirational prayer. O, as I roam in cyclic existence driven by deep-seated desire, may the transcendent Lord Amitabha draw me forward, leading me on the path of radiant light, which is the pristine cognition of discernment. May the Supreme Consort Pandaravasini support me from behind, and thus encircled may I be rescued from the fearsome passageway of the intermediate state, and be escorted to the level of an utterly perfect Buddha. By making this aspirational prayer with fervent devotion, you will dissolve into rainbow light in the heart of the transcendent Lord Amitabha and his consort, and you will attain Buddhahood as the Buddha body of perfect resource in the Western Buddha field of the blissful Sukhavati. Although it is impossible not to be liberated by the successful recognition of this introduction, there are nonetheless those who will be unable to give up their propensities due to habituation over long periods of time, even after receiving such an introduction. Under the sway of envy and negative past actions, they will become fearful and overawed by the sounds and luminosities. Failing to be caught by the light ray hook of compassion, they roam downwards into the fifth day. So it is that on the fifth day, the transcendent Lord Amoghasiddhi's assembly of deities, resplendent with the light rays of compassion, will come to escort them, and at the same time the light path indicative of the realm of the anti-gods, which is generated by the dissonant mental state of envy, will emerge invitingly. Again, calling the deceased by name, the introduction should now be given with the following words. O child of Buddha nature, listen without distraction. On the fifth day, the purity of the entire wind element will arise in the form of a green light. At that time, from the green northern Buddha field called Matrix of Enlightened Activities, Karma Prasiddhi, the transcendent Lord Buddha Amoghasiddhi with his retinue will dawn before you, his body green in color, holding in his right hand a crossed vajra, seated on a chivam chivaka, bird throne, and embraced by the supreme consort, Samayatara. These two are encircled by two male bodhisattvas, Vajrapani and Nivarana Vishkambin, and two female bodhisattvas, Ganda and Nati. Thus 6 Buddha bodies will be shining before you from within a space of rainbow light. A green light indicative of the pristine cognition of accomplishment, which is the natural purity of the aggregate of motivational tendencies, green and dazzling, radiant and clear, bright and awesome, adorned by greater and lesser seminal points, will emanate from the heart of Amoghasiddhi and his consort, and it will shine piercingly before you at the level of your heart, with such brilliance that your eyes cannot bear it. Do not be afraid. This is the natural expressive power of your own awareness. Rest in a state of great equanimity, transcending activity, free from the dichotomies of attachment and aversion, based on your feelings of nearness and distance. Together with the light of pristine cognition, a dull red light indicative of the realm of the anti-gods and formed by envy, will also dawn before you and touch your heart. Cultivate an equanimity toward this dull light, which is free from attachment or aversion. Even if your mental capacity is diminished, at least do not delight in it. At this time, under the sway of deep envy, you will wish to turn away in terror from the bright and dazzling green luminosity, and you will come to feel delight and attachment towards the dull red light of the anti-gods. At this moment, abandon your fear and recognize the green luminosity, bright and dazzling, radiant and clear, to be pristine cognition. Let your awareness relax and abide directly within it, resting in a state of non-activity. Pray with devotion, thinking, this is the light ray of the transcendent Lord Amoghasiddhi's compassion. I take refuge in it. This, in reality, is the light ray hook of the transcendent Lord Amoghasiddhi's compassion, which is known as the pristine cognition of accomplishment. Be devoted to it. Do not turn away. Even if you do turn away, the luminosity will accompany you inseparably. So do not be afraid. Do not be attached to the dull red light of the anti-gods. This is the inviting path of your past actions, which you yourself have engaged in, whilst motivated by deep envy. If you become attached to this dull light, you will fall into the realms of the anti-gods and experience the unbearable sufferings of unrelenting conflict and quarreling. This dull light is an obstacle blocking the path to liberation. Do not be attached to it. Give up your yearning. Do not cling to it. be devoted to the green light, which is radiant and dazzling, and focus intently and single-mindedly on the transcendent Lord Amoghasiddhi and his consort, and recite the following aspirational prayer. O, as I roam in cyclic existence, driven by deep-seated envy, may the transcendent Lord Amoghasiddhi draw me forward, leading me on the path of radiant light, which is the pristine cognition of accomplishment. May the Supreme Consort, Samayatara, support me from behind, and thus encircled may I be rescued from the fearsome passageway of the intermediate state, and be escorted to the level of an utterly perfect Buddha. By making this aspirational prayer with fervent devotion, you will dissolve into rainbow light in the heart of the transcendent Lord Amoghasiddhi and his consort, and you will attain Buddhahood as the Buddha body of perfect resource in the northern Buddha field called Matrix of Enlightened Activities, Karma Prasiddhi. By giving this introduction repeatedly in this way, however weak the positive residue of a deceased individual's past actions might be, he or she will have the opportunity to attain recognition at one point or another. As recognition occurs at any point, it will be impossible for liberation not to be achieved. However, owing to a long association with myriad habitual tendencies and an unfamiliarity with pure vision and pristine cognition, even after being introduced repeatedly in this way, there are some who are nevertheless led backwards by negative propensities, despite this setting face-to-face having been given. Failing to be gripped by the light ray hook of compassion, they will be overcome by awe and terror upon the arising of the lights and rays, and continue to wander downwards. Thereupon, on the sixth day, the male and female deities of the 5 enlightened families, together with their retinues, will arise simultaneously, and at that very moment, the 6 dull lights, indicative of the 6 classes of living beings, will also arise simultaneously. Therefore, calling the deceased by name, the introduction should be given with the following words. O child of Buddha nature, listen without distraction. Until yesterday, the visions of the 5 individual enlightened families arose before you. Despite this, even though the former introduction was given, you experienced awe and terror, a response generated by your habitual tendencies. Consequently, you have remained in your present state until now. If you had previously recognized one of the natural luminosities of the pristine cognitions of the 5 enlightened families as being a natural manifestation of actual reality, you would have dissolved into rainbow light at the heart of one of these Buddha bodies of the 5 respective enlightened families, and attained Buddhahood in the Buddha body of perfect resource. Yet, since you have been unable to recognize these experiences as being natural manifestations, you have wandered here. Therefore, listen now without distraction. The vision of the entire peaceful assembly of the 5 enlightened families, together with that which is called the vision of the 4 pristine cognitions combined, will now come to invite you. Recognize this. O child of Buddha nature, at this time the 4 colored lights, which are the pure forms of the 4 elements, will dawn before you, and simultaneously the Buddha Vairochana and his consort will arise, as before, from the central Buddha field of the pervasive seminal point, i.e., Akanishta Ganavyuha. At that same moment, the Buddha Vajrasattva and his consort, surrounded by their retinue, will arise from the eastern Buddha field of manifest joy, Abhirati. The Buddha Ratnasambhava and his consort, together with their retinue, will arise from the southern Buddha field of the glorious Srimad. The Buddha Amitabha and his consort, together with their retinue, will arise from the western Buddha field of the blissful Sukhavati. And the Buddha Amoghasiddhi and his consort, together with their retinue, will now arise before you from the northern Buddha field, called Matrix of Enlightened Activities, i.e. Karma Prasiddhi, all arising together out of a space of rainbow light. O child of Buddha nature, encircling these male and female deities of the 5 enlightened families, the male gatekeeper, Trilokya, Vijaya, Yamantaka, Hayagrivajara, and Amrita Kundalin, will also arise, together with the female gatekeepers Ankusha, Pasha, Spota, and Ganta. In addition, the 6 emanational sages, who are transcendent lords, will also appear before you. Indra Shakra, who is the sage of the gods, Vimachitra, who is the sage of the anti-gods, Shakyamuni, who is the sage of humans, Stirasimha, who is the sage of the animals, Jvalamukha, who is the sage of the anguished spirits, and Dharmaraja, who is the sage of the hell beings. Accompanying the above array, Samantabhadra and Samantabhadri will also arise before you, in the form called Samantabhadra and Consort in Union, the coalescence which is the progenitor of all the Buddhas. These, the 42 assembled deities of the Buddha body of perfect resource, will emanate from within your heart and then appear before you. Recognize them, for they have arisen from within your own pure vision. O child of Buddha nature, these Buddha fields do not exist extraneously. They are the 5 aspects of your own heart, its 4 directions and center. Emanating now from within your own heart, they have arisen before you. These Buddha bodies have not arisen extraneously. They have spontaneously arisen, atemporally, from the natural expressive power of your own awareness. Therefore, recognize them as they are. O child of Buddha nature, these Buddha bodies that you see before you are neither large nor small, but perfectly proportioned, and they are all adorned with their respective ornaments, costumes, colors, postures, thrones, and hand gestures. The array is made up of central couples of male and female deities, forming 5 distinct clusters, and each cluster of 5 is encircled by an aura of 5 colored lights. All the male bodhisattvas of the 5 enlightened families who accompany the male Buddhas, all the female bodhisattvas of the 5 enlightened families who accompany the female Buddhas, and the entire mandala will arise before you, perfectly and simultaneously. So, recognize them. They are your own meditational deities. O child of Buddha nature, from the hearts of the male and female Buddhas of the 5 enlightened families, the light rays of the 4 pristine cognitions combined, very fine and clear, like a spider's web, will dawn before your heart, like the entwined light rays of the sun. First, a sheet of radiant white light rays, bright and awesome, indicative of the pristine cognition of reality's expanse, will emanate from the heart of Vairochana and touch your heart. Above this sheet of light, a white seminal point resembling a mirror, facing downwards, will arise, emanating light rays, extremely radiant, bright and dazzling, adorned with 5 distinct seminal points of like nature, each of which in turn will be adorned by greater and lesser seminal points, forming an array with no center or horizon.